This bonus episode features writer Tricia Aurand, co-host of Beyond the Screenplay. Find more on her website, triciaaurand.com.
Welcome to another bonus episode of the IndieEye Film Awards podcast. And in this episode, I am so excited to tell you that I got to have a conversation with Tricia Aurand. Tricia is a co-host of Beyond the Screenplay, along with Michael Tucker, Alex Calleros, and Brian Bittner. And this talented group is an absolute pleasure to listen to each episode as they break down films and talk about the structure of the movies, the writing, the cinematography, everything that's involved in filmmaking. And from my perspective, when I discovered them in early-ish 2019, I believe that's when they began the podcast, this immediately became my go-to for just interesting filmmaking type of content. They really invest a lot of time and they do some deep dives into the films and things that they talk about. It's really free education, and they have kept me company through so many long drives and house cleaning days and production gear preparing times. And I know that when I need to get in the mood for doing what I got to do, listening to them really helps me get in that director mindset, or that filmmaking mindset. So on a wing and a prayer, I boldly reached out to Tricia to ask her if she'd be interested in coming on and talking about what she does. Now, she is a writer, super talented, very gifted. She loves movies. She's great as a co-host for the podcast, Beyond the Screenplay. But what I also thought was really great is that she offers screenplay coverage. So you can hire Tricia Aurand to read over your screenplay and give you some very valuable feedback. How do I know? You're going to find out in this episode, because Tricia was kind enough to watch my independent feature, Madison Baker Was Here. And in this episode, towards the end, she gives some feedback about what she thought about the film. Now, of course, she didn't get to read the screenplay, and I didn't get that coverage. Now, I did get coverage before I shot Madison Baker. I did have two different professionals do coverage on the screenplay, and the feedback that came back was it was all 100% accurate. And some of the advice I took, and some I just kind of left on the table because I was a little more firm in what I wanted to make. And that's fine. That's what screenplay coverage is for. But after having this conversation with Tricia and hearing her amazing ideas, I wanted to go just reshoot the movie. And after seeing so many indie films now for 2 years here with IndieEye, we can all use that really good screenplay coverage. Let's get somebody else to look at the script that's not your buddy, or your mom, and really tell you where the problems are, what can be improved. Because, man, when those outside ideas come in, that's just super valuable. It could spark things you never even imagined, and then you're even more motivated to make your film. But even if you're not looking to hire a professional screenplay coverage writer to help you create your passion project, just listen to Beyond the Screenplay. It's a fantastic podcast. Or you can go to YouTube and watch Lessons from the Screenplay, which was a channel created by Michael Tucker, and it's loaded with awesome breakdowns about different movies. So, Lessons from the Screenplay, Beyond the Screenplay, TriciaAurand.com. These are important things to remember. Now, we're going to get to this interview with Tricia, but I need to let everybody know, and this is important. At the end of this episode, I will have some very important information for IndieEye listeners about major things that will be impacting IndieEye almost immediately. So don't miss that. But for now, I present to you, Tricia Aurand. I am so honored to be joined by Tricia Aurand, who I was terrified to reach out to and ask if she might be interested in speaking to me so that we could have a little conversation that might benefit our IndieEye listeners and fellow filmmakers out there. Tricia, how are you doing this evening?
I'm fantastic. How are you, Matt?
I'm wonderful. Now, I discovered lessons from the screenplay, oh, goodness, I don't even know how long ago, and it's so brilliantly done. And then Beyond the Screenplay is something I must listen to religiously whenever there's an upload. And I feel like I've grown so much just by listening to your conversations with the other co-hosts of the show.
Aww.
And I gotta ask you, this, and I'm kind of jumping ahead here, but the time it takes to do these shows, can you talk a little bit about what goes into it for you personally?
Sure. So, we basically break down most of the time one movie while we are per episode, and obviously we watch the movie going into it. It depends on how familiar I am with it. If I will want to watch it more than once, if I will want to read the screenplay, if there's reference material, or if it's an adaptation, if there's other reading I want to do. I nearly always try to read interviews with the filmmakers, or at the very least, remind myself of, wait, when did this movie come out? What was the sort of cinematic landscape at the time? If there are films by the same director or the same screenwriter that I feel like probably would inform a viewing of this particular movie, I'll try to check those out as well. Now, I'm very fortunate in that one of the benefits of being a screenwriter is that I've already seen a lot of movies.
Right.
And so most of the time, going into, we did a recent episode, for example, on the Royal Tenenbaums. And at the time, I was like, well, I've already seen all of Wes Anderson's movies, so I didn't have to sit down and watch any other movies that I hadn't seen yet in order to feel prepared. I had not read the script, but I did get my hands on a copy and started reading it, I believe. And then, did some reading as well from critics and other film theorists and stuff that I admire who had done sort of analysis of the movie before. But it just really varies. I think also you're probably talking to me, the co-host of the four of us that is the biggest nerd and probably does the most homework. So I can't speak to how the other co-hosts of mine, the three gentlemen that I talk to every week on the show, I cannot speak to how much they do or don't do. I think it all just depends on what our interest is in the movie. We tend to get interested in certain aspects of the filmmaking or of the screenwriting, and then we start to go down rabbit holes and research.
Well, your conversations about the films tend to make me fall back in love with these films that you cover. And just like with Royal Tenenbaums, which I hadn't watched in so long, after listening to the podcast, I was like, okay, I've got to go back and watch it now and just enjoy this Wes Anderson experience. And it just enhances my love for the things that you all talk about.
That makes me so happy to hear. Thank you.
Oh yeah, well, I mean, it's just undeniable the way you guys and I'll talk more about Beyond the Screenplay later, but just the collective of intelligence and thoughtful conversation is just something I have not found anywhere else when covering movies like this.
Oh, thank you so much. Honestly, I feel like being a part of the show has made all of us better at watching movies, at talking to each other about movies. It's changed my life in the way that I talk and think about film. So I'm incredibly grateful to be a part of it.
That makes a lot of sense. How did you fall in love with movies and storytelling and writing and all the things?
It's in my blood, I guess. I was very young. I have always been a reader and loved movies, even probably before I could read. When I was about 4 years old, my favorite movie was Walt Disney's Sleeping Beauty, the animated classic. So gorgeous. And I used to watch it every day. And kids do that. They watch movies every day, but I was truly obsessed with it. And I remember being that young and being obsessed with it. And then, I don't know, I just started writing stories pretty much from the time that I could write at all. There's, a book that I wrote in second grade that has a plot. It has a hero with a a protagonist with a goal and clear obstacles and stakes.
Wow.
And I don't know, it's just how my mind works. And then, movies since I was very, very young. And I started in the theater, and I've written plays as well. And I've written, short fiction, and I think in 4th or 5th grade, I co-wrote a novel with some friends of mine. But yeah,
Wow.
It's just, I don't know, it's always been a part of who I am.
So were you a kid going through high school where you always had the notebook with all your school books, and in the middle of class you'd be writing?
Oh, yes. Oh,
Yeah.
yes. Yes.
Okay.
Big time.
Very
And-
relatable.
yeah. And in high school, too, that's when I started making movies. So I, had a little camcorder, and I was shooting movies with my cousins and siblings around the neighborhood kind of thing, and then editing them on like god awful little editing software. It's really hard to get started, but when you're young, you don't have access to equipment, although it's so much easier now. Anybody with an iPhone can do it.
Right.
We didn't have that back in my day, but
Nope.
before that, I was, like I said, doing dramas and plays. So you can always write narrative, especially in like dialogue and sort of storytelling play format or theater, even if you can't make a movie.
Yeah, kids today, they're so lucky. I was shooting on VHS.
Right?
And it was just impossible to get much done. But gosh, you could do anything now and distribute it for free for
Yep.
anybody to watch across the world.
Yeah.
I'm jealous.
Me too.
Now, you were in high school filming all these things, writing things, you're doing drama, but what are the steps you took from there to get to the professional position you're in today?
Well, I went to film school. I went to film school out here specifically for directing, but then started, studying screenwriting as well while I was in college and undergrad. And mostly because I wanted to be a writer-director, but along the way, I kind of realized that the directing piece was going to be really challenging. Everybody in film school wants to be a director, at least when I went there, and not everybody can write. And so I thought to myself, well, I can write. Well, I've always been writing, so that seems easy enough to do. And I didn't necessarily give up on my directing dreams forever or anything like that. And I actually still direct theater, like in a very informal capacity, like I volunteer, mostly with youth. But
Sure.
I don't know. The writing aspect of it seemed accessible to me in a way that the directing aspect of it did not necessarily seem accessible. And so I sort of pivoted and started focusing on the writing part. And to be honest, as a director, I'm very much, I don't know, I guess you could say an actor's director or a storytelling director anyway. You and I were talking off mic about how not tech savvy I am. And a lot of directors, especially these days, need to be very tech savvy. I find that directors sort of fall into two camps, which are, sort of the camera director and the actor director. And the really great ones do both really, really well. But some of our most famous directors are camera directors, and they notoriously, just hire the best actors around and let them give them, a lot of freedom. So, and that's not me. I'm not a camera director. I don't know. I hardly know what a camera is, to be perfectly honest. I cheated on my editing final in college because I couldn't figure that out. And so I'm very much just a storytelling person. And so I think that's another part of the reason that screenwriting seemed accessible to me, not just because the industry seemed accessible, but the actual technology learning curve and part that I was interested in. I was like, put words on paper. Got it. Know how to do that. seems like I can handle it.
Well, that is the most important part of any type of entertainment, I believe, in this field, is the storytelling and making sure that you're following particular structure or breaking that structure, but doing it in a smart and creative way, and developing characters. I mean, without that, it's, you can have the greatest cameras and audio gear in the world, but if the story sucks, then no one's going to want to watch it.
I mean, I'm glad that you see it that way. But time and again, that's kind of proved not to be true, or at least Hollywood has never treated writers that way. In the old studio system, writers were the bottom rung on the ladder, and they were the most disposable people in the room. And we're barely treated better now. I mean, we are treated better now. There's kind of an understanding that there's art to screenwriting. But if you ask a person on the street, they could probably name a dozen directors for you. Not even like a cinemaphile, but just a person could name directors for you, and they wouldn't be able to name screenwriters that are not also directors. So there's still sort of this opacity to the screenwriting career for people for just lay people. Even people who enjoy movies kind of don't see screenwriting as being like the thing. And there's a perfectly valid reason when you look at it in a certain light, because in virtually every other kind of writing, playwriting being maybe an exception, but in virtually every other kind of writing, the writing itself is the product. The writing itself is the novel, is the book of poetry, is the article. And in screenwriting, that's not the case. The screenplay is not the product. And so and as any screenwriter will tell you, by the time the product gets to the consumer, it often scarcely resembles what you wrote down on paper to begin with. So there's a very good reason why studios don't necessarily revere writers, and even other directors and producers and people who are responsible for making the actual product. It's because they're making the product. And if they do it well, and in a dream world, they respect you and they respect what you've written, then it does look mostly like what you wrote down. But unless you yourself are the director, then that's not necessarily the case. And even in playwriting, the text of the play is treated with irreverence, probably because playwriting is a much older profession. But the text of the play is treated with irreverence that is not true in the film industry. And as we know, also TV writing is a completely different animal altogether. It's very collaborative in a way that screenwriting is often not. So it's sort of a unique position that screenwriters are in. You can't win a Pulitzer for a screenplay. You can win a Pulitzer for literally any other kind of writing. You can win a Pulitzer for music, but you can't win a Pulitzer for a screenplay because a screenplay is considered not finished.
And that's a shame. That's really a shame.
I very much agree.
Yeah. Well, and I'm going to deviate a little bit here because I know that you have also been a teacher and you have spent time subjecting young minds to films they have never seen before, and and you get to have that experience, like you were just explaining this on the Sixth Sense episode of Beyond the Screenplay podcast. Can you talk about what drove you to get into this type of thing?
Teaching?
Yes.
I don't know. I really enjoy it. Like many screenwriters, I had a lot of day jobs before I was able to start writing full time. And most of them, crushed my soul and made me want to die, like waiting tables. I was not a great waiter. And I worked at a coffee shop, as we all do at different times, and things like that. But I started teaching many years ago now at an after-school program, and specifically as an English teacher in writing and enrichment. And before that, I had done some tutoring and things like that. Again, because writing is just something that comes easily to me, and I just love assisting people with it. And so I started doing that. I didn't really have the qualifications, but it was just after school. And so I discovered I really liked it. And then I did that for years, and I kind of miss it. Like, now that I don't teach anymore, I still volunteer. But I do kind of miss actually teaching because it's so rewarding to help young people see writing differently, and even reading. We would do a lot of analysis in my classroom as well. It's not all grammar. Most of it is literature and story analysis and thematic analysis of the kind that we do on Beyond the Screenplay. And it was just such a joy to me. And it was while I was teaching that Michael approached me and asked me to join lessons from the screenplay.
Oh, well, it just warms my heart to know that somebody like yourself is out there introducing young minds to the art of writing and the way and movies they have never seen before. I can't imagine being in a room full of people who've never seen The Sixth Sense.
Oh God, it was amazing.
That's so awesome.
So fun.
As an aside, your Sixth Sense episode of Beyond the Screenplay, I saved for my recent drive from California to Wyoming.
Oh wow.
And my 15-year-old has never seen The Sixth Sense.
Oh my God.
So he had headphones on in the back of the vehicle, and I started to play the podcast through the truck. And it got to a point where he said something during the podcast about what you guys had said. And I was like, "You're listening to this?" He's like, "Yeah." And I was like, "Okay, podcast off. We're not gonna listen to it." And then it crushed me because I had saved this for like 2 weeks to listen to.
Oh wow!
And he's never seen it. We meant to see it before we left, but we're still waiting for that. So I'm so looking forward to that brain bending moment.
Oh, I
for
so
him.
hope it's worth it. I hope it wasn't spoiled for him yet.
No, not yet.
Oh, good.
But gosh, that moment of sitting in the theater and like going, wait, is this movie broken? What just happened? I don't understand it. Oh my God, you're kidding.
The hard part is just sitting there and saying nothing while you're like someone next to you is experiencing the mind melt, and you're just like,
yes.
Yeah, it's happening. It's happening right beside me.
Oh, that was so much fun. Mm-hmm. But I digress. What is your go-to comfort movie?
I thought a lot about this, and thank you for not surprising me with this question, but you tipped me off to it beforehand.
Yes.
It's really just things that I've seen a lot. I'm one of those people that doesn't mind rewatching movies if they're ones that I love. And so whenever I'm sick, for example, which I think is the very definition of a comfort movie, I watch Audrey Hepburn movies. Breakfast at Tiffany's and Sabrina, which is probably my favorite one, and Roman Holiday are the three that are kind of on rotation there. My partner will sometimes come home and I'll be watching Sabrina or something and he'll be like, "Oh God, are you okay?" Like he just knows that I'm probably under the weather if I'm watching an Audrey Hepburn movie. And then also action movies. I love action adventure movies, and ones that I've seen a lot are I go to again and again. The Missions Impossible, that series they're amazing. The Bourne trilogy, those first three movies are great. I've seen them a bunch of times. I love heist movies, so the Ocean's movies, I've seen those a ton of times, and I'll watch those. I'll just watch those all day.
Well, I would say that my go-to is Godfather 2.
Wow.
I can always just sit there and feel better with that going on. But I've got a really weird one. The Story of Us.
I don't know that movie.
That is it's Rob Reiner.
Okay.
And it's Bruce Willis and Michelle Pfeiffer. It was like 98, 99, I think it came out. It's just an absolute, and I had no business enjoying this film when it came out. I wasn't married. I wouldn't be married for another couple of years. But now that I'm 20 plus years married, that movie just holds so much more relevance to my life with the experience behind me. But yeah, The Story of Us, which just does not get enough love, in my opinion, and wonderful performances by the leads.
Now I need to check it out.
Oh gosh. Yeah. And hey, do an episode on Beyond the Screenplay. But
it's going to be a hard sell there for some of my co-hosts.
It probably will. But it's just a little, I think it's very endearing and very true to life.
Sure. I mean, I love Rob Reiner. So.
Oh yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. And we're going to talk a little bit later about a little film called Madison Baker Was Here, which I wrote and directed, and giving you an opportunity to give me criticisms regarding it. But a big influence for that was Stand By Me.
Of course.
And generally what I try to say is that when I try to explain my attempt on the film is that It's Stand By Me, but with girls, if somebody who really liked John Hughes films tried to direct it. So,
and nobody dies. You got to mention that part. There's less death.
So I'm a big Reiner fan myself. Okay. You have written books and you have written screenplays, but I'm interested to know, what are the biggest challenges for both?
Well, first of all, I've written a book. I've only written the one book, which I was hired to do. And the book that I wrote, Taking Flight, the Nadine Ramsey story, is a nonfiction biography. And as I mentioned, I was hired by members of the family of this remarkable woman. She was a pioneering woman pilot. And I started writing that I started researching in 2017 and then started writing in 2018. And it probably took me about 18 months to write that. And I'll say it's not necessarily a fair comparison in any way to my experience writing screenplays, because the book is nonfiction. And writing nonfiction versus fiction was much more challenging for me, I think, than writing prose versus screenplay. I think I might have an easier time. I've never written a novel, so what the hell do I know? Maybe this is not true. But I think I might have an easier time writing a novel than I would writing a nonfiction book, because it was quite a challenge to shift into nonfiction mode on that book. So,
well, I imagine you're kind of having to color within the lines when you're doing a biography.
Very much. Yeah, very much. And when I was hired initially, the thought was that the book would be a trade book. But as we went into the process, and then, we didn't have a publisher at the outset. And so we ended up at an academic press. And so we ended up with, essentially an academic text, which means we had to go through peer review, at least a couple of rounds of peer review. And we're at the University Press of Kansas with that book. And that was also a big wake-up call for me in terms of, like, this cannot be fudged. This cannot be cut away to a new scene. These characters, when you're working an adaptation in a screenplay, even if you're working with historical material, which I do a lot, you can smooth out the rough edges of what actually happened to make it something, sleek and palatable, or just more efficient. And because efficiency is the king in screenwriting, and efficiency is not the king in nonfiction prose writing. Honesty and fact is the king. So that was kind of the biggest thing for me, where if I had known that we were going to be at an academic press and we were going to be going through peer review, I would have documented everything better. Basically, I ended up having to go back and footnote my entire book after I had written it.
Oh, my goodness.
It was exhausting.
Well, and I did order Taking Flight. I ordered the hardcover this morning. So I'm looking forward to getting that and checking that out. Yeah, well, you've also written a screenplay that was made into a feature film. And this movie is called They Crawl Beneath. It's available for streaming now. How did you grow as a writer creating this project and then seeing it get made?
Sure. It's actually my second feature that has been produced. I wrote another film for the same producer, actually, called Middleton Christmas, that is also available on streaming.
Cool.
And the producer in this case, I was hired by a nonprofit that does really cool work, actually. They train military veterans to work on movie sets. So they produce a number of low-budget genre movies every year for training reasons, basically. And often they do get distribution here and there. But the purpose of them is to provide jobs and training for military veterans.
That's so cool.
It's very cool. And I'm a military brat myself. My dad was in the Coast Guard for 20 years. It's something I really care about. And so I've enjoyed working with them. And so working on Middleton Christmas was a great experience, getting to write a Christmas movie. And these are very micro budget features. And the same with They Crawl Beneath, which is, kind of a creature feature a B horror movie kind of a thing. So both of those films were a ton of fun, and I had a blast working on them. And in so many ways, working in that kind of environment, it's a little bit of a dream where you actually do have a lot of freedom as a writer, because you're just writing a genre movie and you're kind of trying to make it the best thing it can be. And often there's like a limited amount of time, and because you're trying to get the movie made on schedule and things like that. And so writing quickly is one thing you learn. And then also writing, just writing with maximum enjoyment of not needing to worry necessarily about like heavy cinematic scrutiny, I think is another thing I really have enjoyed about doing those.
Sure. Well, I know one thing. My co-host and wife, Dre, will absolutely enjoy watching Middleton Christmas, and we will be sitting down for that because she is a Christmas movie nut, and she's always looking for new stuff. So I'm really looking forward to checking that out as well.
Oh, good. I really love that little film. I hope you guys like it.
Yes, and I will report back.
Okay.
In coming together with lessons from the screenplay and beyond the screenplay, how did this full team assemble?
Oh, wow. I mean, that's a great question for Michael Tucker, who is the creator of the lesson. I mean, I'll tell you the shortest version that I can, but he's the creator of Lessons from the Screenplay, which is a YouTube channel that does educational 10-minute-ish video essays. And the YouTube channel breaks down screenwriting technique in film in, like I said, these very bite-sized, focused, clear, almost, educational, academic kind of lessons. And they're accessible, they're accessible to a middle schooler on up. And it's just, here's something you might not have thought of in terms of screenwriting or storytelling in a film, broken down in a really clear way, a very focused aspect in a certain film. And so he started doing that back in the day. He's one of the OG educational YouTubers. Mm-hmm. And he was fortunate enough that he found success very early on. And so he did it himself for a while, where it was just him and a producer, and he was kind of just following his own interests and things that he was interested in terms of screenwriting that he could investigate in this video essay format. And then in, I want to say 2018, he started bringing on a few more people because he was starting to get burnt out, or he's starting to feel a little myopic about the channel and exhausted of just working on it by himself for so long. So he brought in an editor, Alex Calleros, who's an old friend of his. And then he brought in me. I was an acquaintance of Michael's. We had a mutual friend, and we kind of reconnected at this wedding of mutual friend of ours and started chatting movies. And then he asked me if I wanted to take a stab at writing one of these videos. And then around the same time, Brian Bittner, who was a movie critic writing a column, found Lessons from the Screenplay also. And he reached out to Michael and kind of offered to take a stab at writing a video as well. And so Michael gave both of us a shot as writers, and it went really well. And Alex was editing the videos for a while, and our producer Vince Major was producing them, and we started making videos together. And then right around the time the channel had 1 million subscribers, which I want to say was in early 2019, we launched Beyond the Screenplay, where basically we do the same thing that we do in the videos, except much more conversational, and we're able to take a much closer look at movies. And so, and not have to boil it down into one lesson, but just really dive into all the things a particular movie does really well from a screenwriting and storytelling perspective. So I'm beyond over the moon lucky that I get to do that for my day job.
Yeah, no kidding. And we talked about comfort movies, but I think Michael's brilliant, but I think Michael is probably my comfort podcaster voice.
Oh, he's got a great voice.
Here, watching the old Lessons from the Screenplay and listening to Beyond the Screenplay, and his input is always just so it's effortless to listen to him and take in, like you said. It's accessible for a middle schooler to understand, And yeah, he's brilliant at what he does. And I mean, you know, Brian and Alex are obviously really, really good at what they do as well. But, you know, shout out to Michael there for being the pioneer in doing this. And
it lends itself, the video essay format lends itself really well to what Michael has always wanted to do with the channel. You know, video YouTubers tend to, especially those that talk about film, tend to focus on different aspects of things that they're interested in film. And a lot of it is critique or analysis on like a meta level, or, you know, sort of from a business perspective or through like a social or political lens. And all of that is really valuable and interesting. And we have a lot of like channels that I would consider to be sister channels to ours that do that kind of video essay. But with Michael's channel and Lessons from the Screenplay, we really are just trying to do like a straight analysis, objective analysis, look at what's on the page, look at what's on the screen, and then talk about what's actually happening. What's the technique that's actually being practiced? Right. And that in itself, while I find it sometimes to be incredibly narrow and frustrating, is also tremendously useful when you sit down yourself to write a screenplay. And it does make you a better moviegoer when you can better understand what's actually happening in front of you from a storytelling and the strictly storytelling that's happening.
For Tricia Aurand and Beyond the Screenplay, what films that you haven't discussed would you most like to have featured on the podcast?
Oh God, there are so many. A lot of those action movies that I mentioned that we haven't done. Sure. I can't wait until we do them. We're scheduled to cover the Bourne trilogy when we hit 1,250 is how we're going to say that number. Oh, okay. Patrons.
Yes. Nice.
When we hit 1,250 patrons, we're going to cover the Bourne trilogy, which I can't wait to do. We do have a sort of tentative plan. We're going to talk about the Mission Impossible series, but we haven't quite figured out how to do it because it's a lot of movies. Yes. We'd end up covering those movies over the course of, 2 or 3 months. And it'd be a long time for someone who's not interested in them to try to wait out before listening to the show again. So we're working on a plan on how we can best cover those. And then there's a lot of older classic films or foreign films or indie movies that I would love it if we would cover. But, the thing about our show is that because we do sort of deep dive analysis, listeners tend not to listen to episodes for movies they haven't seen. So we try, and one of the ways that we help our listeners is by announcing, next time we're talking about this movie. So if you haven't seen it, go check it out. And people have responded really well to that. And I think a lot of folks do follow along at home. But with older classic films, foreign films, or indie movies, it's much harder for folks that are not interested or haven't already seen a movie to sort of like access that podcast. So, but I know we'll get to some of that stuff eventually.
Well, what do you hope listeners take away from each episode of Beyond the Screenplay?
I hope they take away what we've taken away from the experience of doing it, which I think that the way that we talk about movies to each other on the show feels like we're making each other smarter. It feels like we're listening to each other in a way that the discourse about film is often not careful or nuanced or thoughtful. And people tend to respond emotionally to movies, which is good. That's part of what they're for. But being able to kind of dig into your own emotions and say, well, I felt this way when I was watching this part, and maybe here's why, and getting into what's actually happening in the movie is incredibly useful and makes us better at watching movies and better at talking about them with each other. And that's what I really hope listeners take away is maybe some helpful language or a helpful lens through which to look at film. Because as I mentioned, it's definitely changed everything about the way that I watch film, knowing that I'm going to have to talk about a movie that I love and either defend an aspect of it that I that is maybe not well done, but I still enjoy, or just break down, hey, this thing is really interesting and I haven't thought about it this way before. I'm always very curious and excited to hear what my co-hosts are going to say about a movie, because we tend to notice different things. And, I think film is something that we should have bigger conversations about and be willing to talk about for longer, especially because it's one of the primary modes of storytelling these days. And the idea of reducing movies to like a star rating or something is just insane to me now.
Absolutely.
I wouldn't even know where to start with that. So, I hope that listeners have even a fraction of the experience that I have getting to be a part of the show.
Well, and what's the best way for someone who does listen to the show? What's the best way for them to support Beyond the Screenplay?
Oh, I mean, immediately you can become a patron. We have very low tier, ways to join that are not expensive, and they tremendously help support us. We do have ads and we do have sponsors and things, but the vast majority of the support that we get financially that helps us keep doing the show is from our patrons. So that's a big one. We just launched a line of merch. So if you do listen to the show and you do like it, you now can wear a Beyond the Screenplay t-shirt, which is fun. And we have a lot of other little things too. Like we've got mugs and notebooks and tote bags and things like that. Or honestly, if you can't support us financially, which I totally understand, and there's a reason why the show is free, we get it. Just listen. And if you like it, you can tell a friend about it. So
absolutely. And I highly recommend all listeners become patrons for Beyond the Screenplay, because some of the best content are the patron exclusive reviews and discussions that you guys have. And the value is tremendous. In my opinion, if you're a creator and you're a filmmaker, you're a writer, you want all of this that you can get and consume. So for the very small amount it takes to have access to these exclusive episodes, it's very well worth it. I highly recommend everyone, if you're not subscribed to Beyond the Screenplay, first go do that. Go subscribe to Lessons from the Screenplay on YouTube, and then give them a little patron follow. Try it for a month, try it for 3 months. You're going to have access to stuff they've done before. And I just think you're going to fall in love with these people, and they're going to become your kind of filmmaking friends, and you're getting a free education every time they drop an episode. So it's film school, it's writing school for a few bucks with the extra content. So highly recommended for me.
Thank you so much. Yeah, on the patron exclusive episodes, we tend to let our hair down a little more.
Yes.
We're often very measured and careful on our show, which is something I like about our show. But then we tend to, the patrons get to pick what we talk about a lot of the times on our patron exclusive episodes. And so we often end up talking about movies that we have spicier opinions on or just thoughts about. So we tend to get a little bit... we have a little more fun over there.
It's a lot of fun. Well, so and another thing that I absolutely love about what you offer for others is your professional screenplay coverage. You're actively helping writers improve. And I saw you tweet about this recently. Mm-hmm. So you're inviting all forms of writers to submit material to you. And of course, there's a price for this. Your time is valuable. This isn't free, folks. But it's more than valuable to have somebody like a Tricia Aurand read through your project. You do short films, you do feature lengths, mm-hmm. and have some constructive criticism send back your way. Is it challenging to get through most of the submissions that you receive?
Oh, not at all. I've read professionally now for a while, and I do on occasion still read for a studio. But I prefer reading for just people, other writers that are out there. I like to freelance for clients. And, the thing is, the scripts that I read for clients they have a wide variety of approaches and a wide variety of goals for their projects. And that's part of the reason I enjoy doing it. When you're reading for a studio, you are reading for that particular studio, that particular executive. You know what they're looking for. And if a screenplay isn't that, then it's just kind of a pass. And you do have to write your coverage and kind of explain why you're passing on it on behalf of the studio. Although, obviously, as a reader, you're not the final word at all. I don't even know what the execs do with the coverage that I write for the studio. Probably ignore it half the time. But you kind of you're beholden to a certain kind of screenwriting and screenwriting goal, I guess. But freelance clients, people write movies for all kinds of reasons. They write movies for they write scripts for competition. They write scripts because they want to shoot them themselves. They write short films just because it's something they're interested in and passionate about. They write for animation, or they write family films, or they write horror movies, or they write TV pilots. And I enjoy reading a wide variety of things, and I try to meet each screenwriter wherever they are with whatever the goal is that they have for their particular script. So it's not challenging. It's interesting. It's fascinating. Screenwriting in the studio system can feel like cutthroat, where you feel like someone just didn't understand what you were going for, or they were looking for something specific, or just like a checklist of a bunch of boxes that you might or might not be interested in even checking with your script. And that's not at all the way that I read. My goal for my clients is to help them make their script the best that it can be with their goals in mind.
Well, regarding your freelance clients, how important is that first page, and what are you kind of looking for to get hooked?
I mean, the first page is very important because it's the first meeting between your idea and the reader. And I would say that it doesn't need to be... I'm not one of those people who would put a script down after the first page. But it can certainly set a tone for the read, where if the first page feels scattered or, not proofread or poorly formatted or directionless or offensive, it'll certainly set a tone for the read where I'm like, okay, we're going to have some work to do here. But most of the time, I don't form a judgment about a script until I get very, very deep into it, if not all the way until the end. This is, again, one of the things that is a luxury of being able to read for freelance clients that I don't kind of get to have for the studio. With the studio, they're looking for a very specific, more commercial eye.
Right.
And if something is not commercial within the first few pages, I kind of know it's probably not what the execs are looking for. And I deal with some of that frustration too in my own writing, where sometimes I want to try something different or start a certain way because for a thematic reason or something. And then, have to realize that my own script is going to be going to a reader first before it ever gets to a producer probably. And just knowing that you have to contend with readers as a force in the business is useful in and of itself, especially if you have commercial goals for your project.
You said something profound. You said the first page is the first meeting between your idea and the audience. Is that what you said?
Yeah, I guess so. Yeah.
Okay, because I'm stealing that. I'm going to write that down and keep it on my computer because I have to always remember that. I particularly found that that's a great point, because so many indie films that we receive through IndieEye, the beginning is an absolute, like, there's no hook at all. And I'm guilty of the same exact thing time and time again, because I do a lot of navel gazing in my first act and rolling around in my own, I'm making a movie about it. And I think that's a great point for that first page. What advice would you give for indie filmmaking screenwriters before they even submit to you for coverage?
I mean, the main thing that I care about is that a script is correctly formatted and that has been proofread. Like, that's just a basic show of respect for whoever is going to be picking up and reading it. And it does feel insulting. I've received scripts that have clearly not even been proofed or correctly formatted, and it's unfortunate. Like, I'm not a stickler for formatting. Modern formatting is much looser than like traditional screenplay formatting, where every other day there's a new argument on Twitter about whether or not to bold your slug lines and things like that. And I don't give a shit about that. But it does need to be in readable screenplay format, and it does need to be proofread just on a basic level. And then the other thing is that, I take scripts everywhere from first draft onward, but again, it depends on what the goals are for the project. You mentioned indie filmmakers. I assume in that case, someone is planning to shoot this movie themselves. If you're planning to shoot the movie yourself, you better know the budget before you write it.
Right.
You better know the locations before you write it. You better have taken those parameters. Your goal for the project is to get it made, so it better be makeable. And if your goal is to get it made and your goal is to send it to a festival, then you need to have the festival landscape in mind and be thinking about where you're going to submit it and what kind of niches are you going to appeal to? What kind of genres are you blending? Those kinds of things, clarity of vision is the thing that I would recommend most. And you can often tell when you're reading a script where someone just had an idea and they wrote it down and they were really excited about it. But there isn't a lot of clarity about what's going to happen next. And so I present these kinds of questions often to my clients and they kind of don't know. Same thing with your storytelling things. If I ask you what the theme of your movie is, probably better have an answer. Or why you want to tell a movie, why you want to tell a story about this particular thing. Because I am the first person that's going to ask you, but I am not the last one. If you write a script and you want a lot of people to see it and it's going to be made into a movie, you better have some really good answers for a lot of that stuff.
Well, we'll have links in the description of this podcast episode so that people can go to your website, they can contact you. Highly recommend Screenplay Coverage by Tricia Aurand, because I'm going to personally receive shortly here some coverage of Madison Baker Was Here. And before we get to that, I just have a couple more questions for you that I think our listeners will find helpful with these answers. What screenwriting advice would you give to a teenage Tricia Aurand?
Oh, God. I would tell her to write TV.
Yeah?
I mean, the landscape right now for features is really difficult in the business just because we're at a very unique sort of crossroads in the movie business. And the one place where there is a lot of work and there is a lot of money is TV. Unfortunately for me, I've almost never really wanted to write for TV. There are some shows that I like, but it certainly was not a path that I took when I was younger. And now I very much wish that I had, because it would be, it's just a little bit of an easier road right now. Or better yet, if you're like a young writer right now, God, write video games. Like, if you want a stable market, write for TV or write for video games. The feature market is not stable. It's not impossible, but just right now it's really difficult.
That is interesting.
Yeah, I wish I were more adaptable, to be honest. But I'd have to change everything about my life to write for TV or film at this point. I'd have to start watching TV. I'd have to start playing video games. And I'm a little bit of an old dog. Don't think that's a new trick I can pick up.
Don't you find it attractive for like these limited series, like a Breaking Bad?
Well, that's not a limited series. That's like that's a long running TV show.
Okay, that's true. That's true. But something with a finite, and like back in the day, kids hit shows they would just keep writing for and add children to, or wacky neighbors to, or different plot people so that they could keep having episodes and sell ads. But now we're in this space where you can have. I mean, did it start with Lost, where you could have a finite ending? But I think now these streaming platforms and you have this extra space, even if it's just like a 6-episode thing, which used to be called a miniseries, kids.
Right.
But I find that isn't that for you as a writer? I would assume that might be more attractive because there's more room to play. No?
I mean, yes and no. I could definitely see myself. First of all, I think I'd be great at writing for TV, even for an open-ended series, if I was interested in doing that. And I'm available for staffing, actually. So if anybody would love to hire me to do that. But there's something about the finite, bite-sized form of the feature movie that I have just always loved. I love the efficiency of it. I love the natural stopping point. This is a story arc. This is a theme. This is the character arc. This is the plot. And here's where it goes. Here are the twists and turns. Here's the break into two and the midpoint and the crisis. I love it. Like, it's just who I am. It's in my blood. And even TV, even limited series, like truly limited series. Like, one of my favorites of the last few years was Station 11. Love that series. And it's short, it's one season. They're not making more. And it's like 8 episodes long, I think. I love it. I adore it. There is more room to play. It's an ensemble. It's a sci-fi show. If you're not familiar with it, really recommend. I could see myself writing something like that, or something like Chernobyl, which Craig Mazin wrote, which is excellent. That's something I wish I'd written. But again, that's not traditional TV. It's written by one person, usually the creator, and a very, very small group of writers who have a very clear roadmap before they ever start writing. And they know they're not making more. So they can close off those endings. They can reinforce those themes. They can make sure those character arcs are solid because it's all mapped out in one place. And the possibility of writing more is closed. So it has that sort of that timetable that I love about screenwriting, where you can map the plot. You can map a solid structure onto an 8-episode arc. So I definitely see myself being drawn to something like that, and I'd love to do it. And I've written pilots with that kind of arc in mind. But what I got into the business to do is write features. And what a horrible time now to try to be doing that.
Well, it's beautiful the way you describe your affinity for the efficiency of film and the structure of film. I adore that as well. Although I just think all forms of writing are such fantastic art, as I'm sure you agree with.
Oh, of course.
And a side note here, Station 11 is queued up for me for my December break, and I was put on to Station 11
nice.
by being a listener of Beyond the Screenplay. So, and something we here at IndieEye completely stole from Beyond the Screenplay is when we have time enough, we'll open an episode by asking each other what we're watching, my wife and I. So I love that you guys at the end of your episodes give heads up to the listeners about things that you're interested in. And I know there's other things you guys have put into my view and have given me a wonderful experience by introducing something to me with. Is that proper English? I'm not sure, but
very close.
Okay. But just more benefits to listening to Beyond the Screenplay.
Oh, thank you.
Many of the films we receive at IndieEye Film Awards lack character development and specifically story arcs. And I feel like, and I think we've all been guilty, young indie filmmakers, of all ages, if you just want to make movies and you're so passionate about it and you're like, okay, I have an idea and I'm going to go out there and I've got my friends together, we're going to shoot something. Maybe you're not necessarily thinking of the technical story structure. And I've also come across those who say, I don't watch movies, I don't study story structure, I'm my own artist, I'm going to make something that's from my own thing and so they don't value the reason why this art exists and how and what makes it successful. You don't need to follow the rules, but you must understand the rules so that you can break them and still tell a good story. So what advice would Tricia Aurand have for filmmakers about character development and story arcs in the writing?
Well, first of all, I do more or less fundamentally agree that screenwriting quote unquote rules are there for a reason. With the caveat that what we typically are talking about is Western screenwriting principles, and that many cultures all over the world don't prioritize the same kinds of things that we tend to prioritize in filmmaking and in storytelling in Western culture. So, I'm not going to go into a French New Wave movie with certain character development and story arc expectations.
Okay.
Or, modern foreign film or anything like that. And I do think to a similar degree, indie film doesn't necessarily, you can have, like I said, you can be interested in other parts of storytelling other than this like rigid structure. But I do fundamentally agree that if you are hoping to reach a wide audience, especially and particularly in Western cultures and in the US, then they're going to have certain expectations when they sit down to watch your movie. And the storytelling expectations that we are talking about, structure, story arc, character development, and theme, those are things that have arisen out of the form over the last 100 and so years. So they're not something that a Hollywood executive somewhere sat down and made up and just imposed upon the rest of us.
Right.
These are forms that come from very old storytelling, and then were translated onto the movie format, a sort of 2-hour bite-sized movie format. And so, again, there's a critical understanding as to why those things are being expected of you. And you can confound those expectations if you wish, but you need to be prepared for some probably negative response from your audience if you're being deliberately confounding of those expectations without having a good reason why. So I'll just put it that way. But my advice is, basically when you sit down to write a movie, you can start wherever you want. You can start with an idea and you just have a really good premise maybe. Or you could start with a character. You just have a person that walks into your brain and you think they're fascinating. But ultimately, it all needs to come together with a story. And I outline before I do anything else. I try to figure out, if this is the premise, then here's where it goes. If this is the character, then what happens to them? And just kind of work on it from there. You can follow all kinds of outlining, different charts and graphs or whatever makes sense to you. I follow 8 plot points when I'm outlining, which was something I came up with in film school and have used ever since. And I roughly sketch in things. One of the things that I always really strongly recommend to screenwriters is figuring out the relationship between your character and what happens to them, and then where the theme lies. And that also comes back to genre. So all of those things kind of need to be of a piece. Genres tend to explore certain kinds of themes and they tend to have certain kinds of characters. So you can start with genre. If you have a certain kind of character, you can look at, okay, where does this character belong? What would be the biggest challenge to them in their life? And you might end up with a superhero movie, or you might end up with a little indie drama. But you could start it from character and then figure out what the genre would be based on what the question is or the challenge is that you think would be most interesting for the character. You could start with a premise. What if, like a Groundhog Day kind of thing? Like, what if this thing happened to this person? And then figure out the character from there, and then figure out the genre from there. And often these things, and then again, the theme arises out of all of that. So these things all dovetail into each other, and you can work on it from any angle that you wish. I strongly recommend working on it on paper in some kind of outlining way, whether that's note cards on a cork board or whether that's just a Google Doc with a lot of ideas on it that you can arrange and, blocks of text, whatever is easiest for you. And then, work on it and work on it and work on it before you sit down and stare at an empty page in your final draft document or whatever, because that's where you start to get really stuck if you don't have all those questions answered or set clearly in your mind.
Well, one thing that's always stood out to me throughout discussions with Beyond the Screenplay is the importance of conveying what a character wants.
Yes.
Can you talk a little bit about the importance of that and how to get that across in the individual scenes?
Sure. I mean, when I've taught storytelling to very young children, we talk about COW, which just stands for character and want, and then in the middle you have an obstacle.
Nice.
This is what I teach to second graders. And so,
Which
you
is
have
most
to have
of
a
our audience, to be fair.
I was going to say, listen, children, you have to have a cow. But yeah, you should know that. I think that's what the essence of story is. What is your character desire? And the way that can be expressed is in a wide variety of ways. But often in filmmaking, what the character wants is different from what the character needs. So a character often has a sort of surface desire that drives the plot, and then they often have a deeper need that they don't realize. And that's kind of what we expect as, like I said, Western moviegoers. We want the character to have some kind of flaw, and that flaw will naturally be addressed by the events of the plot, but we want them not to necessarily realize it right at the outset, right? Character can't be sitting here going, you know what I want? I want to figure out the meaning of my life because it's so abstract and there's no way to concretize that kind of want. That's a character's need. The character needs to figure out the meaning of their life. The character wants to go to the Harry Styles concert or whatever it is. So this is what we kind of expect. And it's even better if the characters need the thing that they desperately need to realize or need to change about themselves is going to be inevitably, irrevocably revealed by the events of the plot. So again, I mentioned Groundhog Day. That's a really textbook example, and we did a video about it on Lessons from the Screenplay. But you have a character's want, which is to get out of Punxsutawney, but his need is to just confront his own selfishness. And because he's stuck in Punxsutawney, spoiler alert for Groundhog Day, I suppose, because he's stuck in Punxsutawney forever, living every day over and over and over again, then he will absolutely, there is no way for him to do anything else other than finally address his need. He's absolutely trapped until he does that. And so that's when a premise and a character, and in that case, a genre, and that all comes together in a theme. And then, I'm sorry, what did you ask? No. Oh, what characters want. Yeah, the characters want is externalized. So the characters want is something you can hear about in dialogue. It's something that you can see visually, ideally. It can be it can be shown in any variety of ways. Having it clear is one of the critical things, though. That's the thing, is that movies are about people who want things and they make plans. And then their plans usually don't work out, but then they make a new plan. And then that plan also usually ends in some kind of crisis, and then they make a third plan, and that's the third act of the movie.
Well, speaking of character development and story arcs and how people should be using those to make their films better, you were kind enough to subject yourself to 80 minutes of a Matt Gray feature film called Madison Baker Was Here. And you kindly accepted my request for coverage. Mm-hmm. This is the part where I'm really, really terrified. But no, what I want to do is set an example for our IndieEye Film Awards listeners in listening to feedback about your film. Now, I know Tricia's a sweetheart, and she's not going to be mean to me. Sometimes I come across as very mean. But Tricia can't say anything to me that is worse than what I've said about myself through the production, through the editing, and through the eventual just letting it go process of Madison Baker Was Here. And to be very transparent, I did have professional screenplay coverage done twice for the screenplay. And I did take some of the advice, the other advice that I saw that I knew was 100% right, and I still refused to follow it, ended up becoming major problems in the edit. So I really enjoyed the learning experience of, this was my first narrative feature film. I've done documentaries and documentary series and blah, blah, blah. But this was my first narrative film. And I wanted to go through it, the entire thing, and then look at it at the end and go, okay, where am I going to get better? So Tricia Aurand, what was your takeaway from Madison Baker Was Here, and how could I, as a filmmaker, as a writer, have made it better for you as a viewer?
Well, first of all, I just want to acknowledge something that's probably obvious to the indie filmmakers that submit to you, and I'm sure was something that you dealt with a lot when you shot this, which is budgetary concerns. Do you mind me asking you what the budget was?
Oh, no, not at all. I think we have it listed as like $5,000. Now, it's not super technical because I owned most of the gear already as a professional freelancer. But I think most of our money was spent on food.
Yep, it always is.
For these bottomless pits.
Yep.
And just the transportation. They had money for wardrobe. They all had money for makeup. And so I just think, about $5,000.
Okay. Yeah. And, the other thing that drives up budget costs is crew. And so, hiring professional editors, say, or hiring professional colorists or sound mixers or things like that. That always drives up the cost. And so you often aren't able to put the polish on indie features that we, professional movies get. So just wanting to state some of those things out front.
Thank you. That's a nice way of saying what I'm hearing.
No, the other thing that money gets spent on in filmmaking is locations. And you can also feel location constraints when you watch indie films. And I certainly felt that with yours. I'm sure you were dealing with location constraints and cast constraints. Every actor that you put in a movie, you have to pay, or at least have to provide meals for.
Right.
And so there are always these things that you consider when you are shooting with an incredibly limited budget. And $5,000 is nothing in the movie industry.
Right.
So I certainly feel for you. And I'm very impressed you made this movie for that amount of money. We've all been there.
Yeah.
So, one of the things that I am sure that you have done and would always encourage indie filmmakers to do is start with comps. What's the indie movie or the even big, budget movie that you are inspired by? You mentioned earlier off mic that you're inspired by, like, Stand By Me, which I can kind of see here. The other ones I thought of when I was watching it were like Dazed and Confused. Ferris Bueller's Day Off is one that I think is a really interesting comp here. Has some similar DNA. Booksmart actually is a recent example that's very similar in a lot of ways.
Okay.
To Madison Baker Was Here. I don't know if you saw it.
I tried.
Okay.
I didn't make it far, to be honest.
That's all right.
But yes.
And then there's a movie that came out very recently called Emergency, which is just now streaming. It was at Sundance this past year that I caught. Was written by a mutual friend of mine and is excellent.
Oh.
It's another one wild night movie kind of a thing, where you have all your characters, you're putting them together, and you're sending them out on an adventure over the course of one evening, which is a nice, smart, contained device for a feature. So anyway, compliments on that approach. I think it overall works really well. Your character here, Madison Baker, has a clear goal. She decides to tell this boy that she likes, Ryan Bright, that she likes him on the last night before she moves out of town. One of the problems is that goal is not introduced right up front.
Yep.
So watching it, I was wondering, is there a way to introduce this goal sooner? So one of the things that I thought about was conflict in scenes. The opening scene of the movie, you have Madison Baker, and she's visited by her best friend, Cass. She's packing up to leave town. As I said, she's moving in the morning to Wichita. It's very vindictive. Wichita is actually a lovely place, by the way.
I know. Yes. Well, I was just thinking, what would a girl, because
Sure.
if anyone's inside the mind of a teenage girl, it's me.
Right.
But, what would sound awful compared to the familiar surroundings of California?
Right. Although I will say it's possible that I missed it, but I didn't catch that the movie was set in California. And I wished it had been a little more clear in the dialogue.
There was one your last night in California is said, but it's, I could understand missing that.
Yeah, but if that were more clear in the dialogue, we'll get there.
Okay.
Anyway, so her best friend Cass wants her to sneak out for reasons that are stated but are not either super clear or super compelling, at least not to me. It's like, you should sneak out because this is our last time to hang out and say goodbye, and you never do anything fun, kind of the gist is that. And I think that that's okay, except it doesn't provide a strong narrative through line for the movie. What I would suggest if I had been reading this as a screenplay is you got to get the Ryan Bright thing, the crush thing up front, and make that the stated goal, if that is going to be the goal that drives most of the movie. So, and it should come out in conflict. It's, which you actually, the scene where the girls find out that she has a crush on Ryan Bright, there's some peer pressuring that's going on. But is there a way to make it even more conflict? Is there a way for Cass to steal Madison's journal and see that there's a crush in there? It's like, you never told me this. Now you have to go do this thing. And again, make it more of like, I really don't want to go do this thing. This is crazy. I'm not going out anywhere. This is nuts. I don't want to do it. Creating that conflict would give that scene a little bit more momentum. And getting the goal out sooner would help, again, dive the audience into, we're going to go tell a crush that we like him. Right. I'm nervous immediately. Let's watch. The other thing is that Cass herself should probably have some kind of secondary goal. Even if it's just like, we're going to cause trouble. The secondary goal should be something like, well, we never do anything fun, so we're going to do X, Y, and Z. We're going to go TP this guy's house. Or my thought was, we're going to go to this party. There's a party going on. We never go do anything. It's your last night. You're going to go to this party. And so having some kind of clear goal, and then it's like, then if you have another clear goal like that, where we're going to go to this party at so-and-so's house, then the Ryan Bright thing could come out along the way. You could save that a little later. Or you can get them out, both of them are going to get out right out front. Here's the checklist of things we're doing tonight. You could even have a tertiary goal for Blair, right? Like, I need to hit 100 followers tonight. So that's like, and the way that we're going to do that is we're going to crash this party. Which is, again, a similar construction to Booksmart, and also very similar to Dazed and Confused, very similar to Emergency, which is also a great movie that I recommend. So something along those lines would get the movie out to a bit of a faster running start. And my note about conflict, I think, applies sort of throughout. The scenes overall have conflict, but could have more conflict. And the conflict could also provide some of the comedy, but I'll get to that in a second.
I'm loving this. Yeah. Note to self, hire Tricia to read the screenplay first. I'm in love with like 8 of these ideas already.
So getting into the second act here, because that's kind of your setup in your opening act. It's your opening 15 minutes. And you could, and again, there's no reason that you can't do this with the same exact budgetary and location constraints that you had. All of that could be done easily at Madison's house, although I would recommend creating a little bit more movement around the area, just because you have the girls standing in the driveway right now, and they could be doing something else. They could be more actively packing. They could be trying to walk down the street and get something from her neighbor who's a jerk. Just something to create a little bit more visual interest as the girls are having these conversations is something I'd probably recommend. But anyway, all that said, once you get into the middle act, twists and turns, there are not actually a lot of them, or the ones that we do have don't feel like huge reversals. Or profound reversals to the trajectory of the movie. And there's definitely space for 1 or 2 more of those that could, again, keep the interest high. So my thought was, let's say we roll with this idea where they're going to a party. What if, so the cast comes in in the driveway, says we're going to this party. But before we go to this party, we're going to pregame at the school, whatever. You can still have that same scene where they're drinking at the school. That's where the thing with Ryan Bright comes out. They're like, hey, you know what? Ryan Bright is at this party. This is our chance. We're going to go. He will be there. Okay. So then we have another motivation to go to the party and a more compelling goal for Madison. But then they get to his house at the midpoint and he's not there. He's not at the party. Meanwhile, hijinks probably ensue. But the whole place that they've been working to get to, and there's probably some stops along the way, is a dead end. And so then that's when they decide they have to go to his house. You have a couple of these moments in there where they end up somewhere else that they're not trying to be. They're in the park. Then they get in the Uber. They're even further, which is not an Uber. Then they're even further away from where they're trying to go. But again, it doesn't feel like their central goal really changes. They start off where they're trying to go to Ryan's house. Then they're still trying to go to Ryan's house for the bulk of the movie. And the detours they take along the way don't feel like they're major reversals or changes. So, another major opportunity for a major reversal would be, okay, we're going to go to this party. Ryan will be there. We're going to have fun at this party. We get there. Turns out it's not fun. Turns out it's horrible. Maybe that's where Nina gets drunk. And then it's like, this is terrible. We're going home. This is the worst idea we've ever had. We're not talking to Ryan. We're not doing anything else tonight. Then the goal is to get home. But then, again, more obstacles come up. So as I mentioned, characters make plans. Their plans are confounded at the midpoint. Then they need to make a new plan. And so I think there could be a bigger midpoint twist here, or a more profound reversal. And it avoids beats getting repetitive in the second act, which they are a little bit here. Mm-hmm. Subplots. This brings me to subplots and themes. So subplots should dovetail in with themes, right? Subplots exist to reinforce or offer different perspectives on the theme. So I'm going to talk about themes for a second, and then I'll get back to the subplots.
Okay.
So you have a coming-of-age story here, which is very sweet. And I overall really like all the characters in it. I should have said that up front. The characters are incredibly likable. They're very charming.
Thank you.
The actors that you hired are wonderful.
Thank you so much.
Yeah, they're great. And there's a really fun dynamic with the four young women at the center of this story. So you have a coming-of-age story. Coming-of-age stories have certain kinds of themes that are inherent in them. And you've got some of them in here already. Coming-of-age stories are often about admitting that you don't know anything or admitting that you don't know X that you've been claiming that you know. In coming-of-age stories, there's often like a very worldly friend who acts like they know everything about sex and drugs and being a grown-up and whatever else it is. And then there's like sort of a more naive friend. And the coming-of-age story is the more, brazen worldly friend has to admit they don't know X.
Right.
Superbad is another example of this kind of movie.
Right.
And that's the first step toward growth, or letting go of something that's been holding you back, which is often the theme that arises from like a more naive friend, right? Mm-hmm. Whatever it is that they've been stewing with, whether it's just fear or whether that's pressure from parents, things like that, letting go of something that has been holding them back from seeking whatever it is that they desire. Lady Bird, by the way, is another great example of this kind of story. So I think sharpening the story's themes would really help. So what in Madison in this case is kind of the more naive friend in the group. And we know from the outset that she feels like she's been invisible. She hasn't made an impression. She hasn't been living truly in her experience. And so, but the question is, why? What is the thing that has been keeping her from doing that? And the film, at least in my watch of it, never really elucidates what that is, other than Madison just needs to let herself go. But that's not very visual, and it's not very easy to kind of like chart in terms of the actions or like the one moment where Madison realizes, this is the reason I haven't been doing this thing that I want, and I'm going to do it because X, Y, and Z. So my suggestion would be to sharpen the backstory. We know that her mother died. Were there expectations placed on her by her mother that she can't let go of? Her mother demanded that she have straight A's, or her mother always told her that she has to go to this kind of school, or her mother always warned her that, about some horror story about telling the boy that she liked, and then everyone made fun of her. whatever that is, there's got to be some kind of ghost or some kind of, I think, really clear reason where Madison always goes back to this thing, and it has just been hammered into her that she can't do this for X, Y, and Z reason. And you already have a dead mother, so you already have the perfect vehicle for introducing that element. So you're about to say something.
Well, I was just I wanted to. I think what you're saying is great to hear, because I pulled a lot of that back out of the screenplay originally and tried to make it very, very leaning on the subtext for exactly what you're describing. Just kind of we don't say, hey, your mom died such, and any of that stuff. I try to make it as if you were already in the friend group listening to them talk. And in my intent, which, if you're explaining, you're losing. But in my intent with Madison is often playing with a ring that's on a necklace around her neck.
I saw her do that, and I assumed it was her mom's, but that was never told to me.
Yes, exactly. And I intentionally left that out. And when every time she's touching that, in my mind, she had taken on kind of the responsibilities of her mother with having a younger sister, and her dad's all alone now. And so she hasn't taken these extracurricular opportunities. And she's very much, just trying to stand in the place of her mom within her family. So clearly I needed to do a better job of delivering that to the audience. And I just really made it super, super low key.
Yeah.
But that.
Well, yeah, and to be clear, that doesn't necessarily mean that it needs to be in the dialogue.
Sure.
Right. It can be her sister. She and her sister are having a knockdown, drag out, screaming fight over the phone. Like, you have to get back here right now, and it comes out. You've always tried to act like mom, and you're not mom. Something like that. Where it again, if these things emerge in conflict, they don't feel trite or shoehorned in, or they emerge in you are definitely on the right track there with the symbol. You can easily have Cass or somebody say, like, I know that was your mom's necklace, but like, you got to let it go. It's got to be in the text somewhere a little bit more clearly about what the issue is.
Gosh, that would have been great.
Something we say on Beyond the Screenplay a lot is, if it's not in the text, it's not in the movie. And, I think that I run into this a lot in my own writing, and I get that note a lot from my own reps and producers and things like that, where I'm like, well, but it's, the actor's going to play it. It's like, no, the actor can't play it if it's not on the page. And if it's not in the text, and again, that doesn't necessarily mean the dialogue. If it's not a symbol you can point to, if it's not an image or an action, or a line of dialogue, if it's not in the text, it's not in the movie, unfortunately. And so you can't expect your audience to pick up on it.
I'm so glad you illuminated that portion of the film. I really appreciate that kind of feedback there.
Oh, of course. Well, if you listen to the show, you'll know that I am, if not about theme.
Yes.
But anyway, so going back to, once you have a really sharp focus on theme, then the subplots should be constructed out of the theme, where the subplots need to dovetail in and offer a different perspective on the theme, or in some way feed into the protagonist's journey or the thematic journey of the movie. So, for example, what has been holding the other girls back, or what do they need to admit that they don't know? If those are your sort of two arcs that you're running with Cass and Madison. So, for example, the subplot with the Uber driver could be more aligned with Madison's themes. Like, where does this guy's story speak to Madison's story? My initial thought when I was watching this was like, why isn't this someone they know? Why isn't this a teacher or an older sibling or somebody from the neighborhood that they've met that has a little bit more life under their belt but has made mistakes? Something that does tie in with the themes and the way that they're living their life could illuminate something to the girls about the choices that they're making. And they are also, there's a reason for that person to bail the girls out of trouble. Right now, that subplot doesn't feel thematically connected. is fun. It's funny, but it doesn't feel like it offers any sort of take to the theme. Same thing with, the other two girls. You have two other girls here. We have this implication that Nina is, very buttoned up and wants to be perceived as smart because of pressure from her family. Something bad happened in her past, which we're never told about, and that's fine. But what is it that she needs to let go of? We don't need necessarily to know all the details of what it is to understand how it's affecting Nina. And if it's something that needs to be let go of, then it needs to be let go of. Blair, you're really close with the admitting she doesn't know something. So, with Blair and Cass, you're really close with these are two people who are acting like they have it all together and they absolutely don't. But I think there's a stronger way to force Blair into that realization or to admitting that she doesn't know. So my thought was, and this is going to lead into my thought about the comedy, but it's like, what if people really are following Blair on social media for once in her life? And the nighttime adventures actually start attracting other people and lots of attention, which would make it harder and harder for them to get away. And then eventually could drive this admission from Blair of like, this was never supposed to happen. No one follows me. This was never going to be a thing. Kind of in a Ferris Bueller's Day Off kind of way where they start to become more and more famous. It'd be a hilarious sequence, and it would be a subplot that would absolutely reveal Blair's lies about who she says she is. Anyway, so that's subplots.
That's fantastic. My wheels are spinning. I'm like, oh man, that could have been so fun to play with.
Which brings me to comedy, the comedy in the movie. You have a lot of really funny dialogue here, but most of the comedy comes out of the dialogue or, again, from a subplot that doesn't feel strongly connected, which prevents it actually from being as funny as it could be. So the best comedy comes from the interplay of personalities in actions as well as in dialogue. So only relying on the dialogue, which in a lot of those scenes, again, I know you're dealing with budgetary constraints. So you have the girls sit around a table at the school and drink, and there are actions there in the way that the girls are choosing to interact with each other. But the best comedies are, in this, I guess this is a dramedy, but they're focused around longer sequences and set pieces, sort of like action movies are, where it's like, here's going to be this long sequence or set piece at this party, or a long sequence and set piece in this car, or whatever it is. And those build and build and build where they get progressively worse until they just, are the funniest thing that also can drive character moments. So, for example, what if you have this character, this Uber driver character, who, again, I think is someone that they should know. But let's say you have this guy and he's got animals in the car. Fine and hilarious. It's very The Hangover kind of a thing. So if you've got a pet in the car, what if it ends up in Blair's purse a lot earlier? And then they're rolling around and they've got a bearded dragon with them and they can't get rid of it and they don't know what to do and they got to find this guy to give it back to him because it's just another hijink. But it continually, this animal that they have with them is getting them into more and more trouble, right? The situation keeps escalating until the snake it's a snake in this version of it in my mind, but the snake, the python that they've been trying to hide in Nina's backpack comes out at the party, and then the party is like blown up completely and the cops come, and these things need to spiral in longer and longer sequences, because if you have them in these more episodic sequences that then just diffuse the tension, you're missing opportunities for comedy as well as drama.
Yeah.
Or again, my idea, people are following Blair on social media, so then people are actually trying to find where's Blair, and it becomes like a huge treasure hunt of all these kids that are out at night looking for these girls. Or what if they keep trying to sober Nina up, but she keeps trying to party, or she accidentally, ends up drinking more. This is a plot point in the movie Emergency that I mentioned. They have a drunk girl in the car with them, and they're trying to sober her up, but somebody has a spiked water bottle that they don't know is spiked, and so it continually becomes more of an issue. In that case, played for drama as well as comedy. But you could have a situation with Nina that their goals for her keep getting thwarted in ever worsening and funnier ways. So that would be my thought on the comedy. It's not that this movie isn't funny; it's that it could be funnier.
Right. God. Yeah.
That's most of what I have so far. Other than one of the big things that I would advise is that, I mentioned it at the top. If you have only a limited amount of resources, I would save some of it on post. And I always advise paying an editor. Like, even if you can edit it yourself and you have the skills to edit it yourself, having an editor take a look at it, just because they see things that directors tend not to see.
Right.
I mean, ask Mrs. Lucas about Star Wars about that. So
Right, of course. Yes, the savior.
Right. So that's definitely one thing I would suggest. I think you do have some error in this movie in the edit that would be pretty easy to get out, and wouldn't cost you that much. I don't think.
Well, I mean, you just sat here and wrote a better movie, and I want to go see that movie. I think that's fantastic. There, just some absolutely wonderful ideas and really constructive. I mean, you're not just calling out the problems. You've really given some excellent solutions in how to handle those. Now, unfortunately, the movie's shot and it's out there and it's done. But I can completely see how your advice would have made the film so much better ahead of time in screenplay coverage, which is what people should be contacting you for before they go shoot their films. Because, I feel inspired right now to rewrite the movie, go out and shoot it again, just based on that feedback. It makes me motivated to get that, because it's kind of a writer's room here where Tricia just threw back a bunch of ideas, and I love them. They just spark more ideas within me. And I did want to call out one thing. You had mentioned, in comparison, a comp for a little bit of Ferris Bueller, which I absolutely tried to do in the script. In the end of the film, the girls are trying
to race back home. Oh,
yes.
I know. Yeah.
I had so much planned for that. Unfortunately, I was dealing with a cast that was so exhausted. And I don't know if you know this, but these girls, they were doing things during the day. We ended up having to shoot in the summer, and it doesn't get dark until like 9:00. So we're doing everything exterior, outside, practical. We're not doing day for night, nothing. It's all at night. And so I had them from about 9:00 to about 11. That's where that's where the meat was.
Oh, God.
And by 11:00, they started to fall off, because they're human beings and they're exhausted. So there was only so much I could do, and in the day we were going to go film these Ferris Bueller-like sequences, we had actually been shooting all of the car scenes the night before. So they probably got home at about 3 a.m. and then we had like a 6 a.m. call time the next day. So I mean, it was just this turnaround.
God bless, yeah.
And having them, once I saw them start to do the running and saw the looks on their faces, I just felt so awful. And I was like,
sweet angels.
You know what? We'll use what we have. I'll figure it out. And in the end, I was like, oh, I wish I would have done something different or figured it out differently. But yeah, I couldn't put these sweethearts through it anymore.
Yeah.
Because they're very important
And this
people.
is indie filmmaking, right?
Yeah.
Like this is what it is. You're working with limited time, limited budget. You have actors that may or may not have the experience or the skills that they need, and you don't have the time and the budget to train them. And, we deal with all kinds of things when you're doing indie filmmaking, and you have budgetary and time constraints. And, I think the challenge for the indie filmmaker is to turn your limitations into superpowers,
yes,
if you can. Honestly, this, as I mentioned at the top, this contained approach to a movie is a really smart one. And the genre is really smart. Like, you're not trying to shoot a superhero movie. You're not trying to shoot huge zombie film or something.
Right.
If you have not very much money, I think actually choosing young women protagonists in a coming of age movie is one of the smartest things you could ever do, because they're always interesting.
Yes.
And it's a situation that's already ripe for drama and for humor. And so the approach is really well done. there's just some finesse here, I think, that, you can hopefully bring to your next experience.
Absolutely. Well, thank you for that. And, to be fair, these girls weren't working with a great director either. There was so much I was learning on the job, and we lost a whole night.
And this is how we learn, right?
Yeah,
this is exactly how we learn.
And it's fantastic. I know there was a night we lost because we were on a location. We were at Ryan Bright's house. And I actually used this later on, but there was a street lamp that was lighting up the house beautifully. But this street lamp started going off and then back on and then off and back on. So all of my lighting was changed and nothing was working the way I had a gimbal I was trying to use, and it was not behaving properly. Actually, when Madison gets on the phone and records her message, that was all supposed to be a walking sequence, walking away from the house. And my gimbal wasn't working, and I didn't want to do handheld, so I had to redirect there. But the very first night there, when the light was clearly a problem, I called the night, and I was like, this isn't happening tonight. I've got to figure something else out. And when I should have been able to, at that point, manage that obstacle and work around it, because I ended up doing that anyways. We didn't change locations.
Right.
But I gave up, and I felt so horrible because here are all these actors and my son, who was my only crew member, who were there for the night to dedicate their time. They waited all day. We were there to shoot, and I called it, and I just felt terrible after that. But now I know I will never do that again. I will direct, because that's what a director has to do. You get to direct a little bit, but you got to solve all the problems. So yeah, which
is part of the exhausting thing about indie filmmaking.
Yes.
Like, it's all on you, and because you're often the producer as well, you can't just call your producer and tell them to fix it.
Right.
So it's a very unique type of filmmaking, and nearly every director has to earn their stripes doing it at a certain point. And it is how we all learn. You look at these indie movies or the small budget movies by these our biggest and best directors,
right,
and you can see the constraints. But the greatest ones that we have, you find a way to use their limitations to drive at theme and tell an interesting story and make unexpected decisions. And so, yeah, I think that there's so much here that has so much potential, and I can see the movie within this movie.
Well, it's kind of you to say that, and thank you for highlighting the cast. They are very special people to me. I was thankful, or I was lucky enough to have worked with them years prior. We had started the idea for the film in 2016, and we shot in 2019. So they hung on for 3 years.
Wow.
Which worked out really well because they ended up getting older and they were more durable for the filmmaking.
Sure.
But they're just such special people to me, and they make any enjoyment that anybody gets out of this film, it's because of those girls and the effort they made to be in this film. So thank you for mentioning them as well.
Of course, they did a wonderful job.
Tricia, is so kind of you to take the time to watch that and give me this incredible feedback. We've gone super long here. You've really given me so much of your time, and I appreciate that. Where can people follow your journey as a writer and in all the things you're doing?
Well, the easiest and best way is on social media. Although, if you're listening to this, if Twitter exists in your future, that would be a way that people used to follow me. And where the easiest thing is to follow Beyond the Screenplay and listen to the show. Right. Even if Twitter dissolves forever, we'll just go on talking into the night about movies until the end of time over on Beyond the Screenplay, I think. So, and any news about things that I'm working on will pop up over there. So definitely recommend that. And I'm overall, I would say I'm embarrassingly Googleable. So you can also just Google my name, and a bunch of stuff that I've worked on is going to pop up, including my book. So you can always give that a read as well. And
I will. Hopefully, I think it comes Wednesday. So
yeah, and we just had the paperback printing just happened. So like a month ago. So the paperbacks are all new. So you can get it in paperback now too.
Very cool. Well, Tricia Aurand, thank you so much. And I'll have links for all your stuff in the description so people can go there, have easy access. But go check out Beyond the Screenplay. subscribe and listen to some episodes. They are fantastic. Being a Patreon is never a bad idea. And if you're writing an indie film right now, reach out to Tricia Aurand and get some screenplay coverage from a professional who just made my film 1,000 times better. And I super appreciate it. Tricia, you've been so kind with your time, very generous. It's been a blast and an honor to talk to one of my favorite people about filmmaking. So thank you for having this conversation with me.
Of course. Yeah, it's been so fun to be here. Thanks for having me.
You know, I've been able to have some really great conversations with IndieEye filmmakers, with people like Whitney Ingram, Caleb Pike, Tricia, and we had more names lined up for IndieEye and such big things planned for 2023. But something has happened within Film Freeway that has altered the course of IndieEye. I will make a blanket statement to say that, well, first of all, Film Freeway was sold at the end of 2021. And at this point, it has become clear to me, in my opinion, that Film Freeway is not interested in actually supporting indie filmmakers. And this is going to cause a significant change in the relationship we have with listeners and our relationship with Film Freeway. There are still some things I'm trying to work out behind the scenes, but Dre and I will be back prior to December 15th to present our 2022 annual awards episode, and we will give you a little bit more detail at the very front of that episode. And I think we may subsequently publish a follow-up episode to the 2022 annual awards to get more into detail and just talk about exactly what I'm alluding to here. In an effort to not sound overly dramatic, I do think it's really, really important for IndieEye alum listeners. If you're a regular listener, you gotta listen to the next two episodes that are dropping after this, because it is game-changing. And I want to tell you some things to look out for in the future. But what I will say right now is that it has been an honor to watch your indie films and have conversations with you all and conversations with our guests. This was a platform that I saw a desperate need for and decided to try it out. And gosh dang it, you guys all made it work. IndieEye would be nothing without the dedicated filmmakers who are out there crushing it and submitting things and are brave enough to send your material to IndieEye with the chance that we might give you some negative feedback. And 99.9% of you have just been so open and welcoming. You've taught us so much, and it's been an awesome ride so far. But it's going to be important to hear what's going on when we talk about it at the beginning of the annual awards episode and the follow-up. And once again, thank you to Tricia Aurand for sharing her time with me, taking time out of her schedule to watch my film, and then give me fantastic ideas and inspiring me to just want to do better. So go check out Beyond the Screenplay, lessons from the screenplay on YouTube. Go to triciaaurand.com and consider hiring Tricia to be your screenplay coverage professional the next time you're writing. Let's all meet back here for the 2022 annual awards episode. And until then, thanks for listening.
Find more information about our guest in the description box of this episode. Thanks for listening to this bonus episode of the IndieEye Film Awards podcast.